Okay, good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 2. We are close to the bottom of page 1190, Aleph Kuf Tzadik. If you're following along in a book, great. If you want to follow the text, it's all available at ayinbeis.com. Okay. Just for the record, at ayinbeis.com, you can also find the earliest classes from the beginning when I started teaching it 9 years ago. So you have all the classes there. There is a break at some point around the chapter 145, but now we've been posting everything over the last months are also up on YouTube, and you can find links to it all there as well. Okay. So now in this mimer, we're going into another interpretation where he said, Yesh lemer oid. In the two phrases in this verse, V'yadaita hayem, you shall know today, V'ashavesel v'vecha, you shall carry it, and into your heart, that Hashemu Elokim, ki Hashemu Elokim, b'shamayim mimal v'la'aretz mitachas. What are these two statements? The heavens above, and the aretz, and the earth below, and on the earth below. So in the previous Maimer discourse, he discussed it in context of negating duality, that the divine is manifest below as above, on earth as in heaven, and Adrab, on the contrary, the main generating of the core divine energy is through the mitzvahs, the actionable mitzvahs we do down below on earth. In this Maimer, clearly with the introduction he made right in the beginning that he's focusing on Momata Lamaila, the V'yadaita Yem is coming generated from below. Keach Atzmai. This is the mitzvah for us to generate a yidiyah, that we should know and become aware and recognize and cognizant to the point of it penetrating and being internalized within us, this yichud of Havaya and Elokim, which we've spoken about as two levels. And what we've discussed so far is the ala aretz mitachas. What does he say? That the process now is starting from the bottom up. In the previous Maimer, he just spoke about the unity of heaven and earth, didn't go into whether it's from the top down or the bottom up, even though he did say that everything is generated by mitzvahs maisius, which is essentially the idea that it's generated from below, but he made it clear in this parenthesis that even a mitzvah is also a gift from above. So here we're talking far more focus on the effort of the person, which of course makes it far more internalized when it comes from within us, the effort of the person. And he said that from Elokim we're coming to Havaya, from the Tzimtzum, which conceals the divine, right? The Tzimtzum, we come to recognize the divine, the Elokus within. So we go to a point of revealing the divine that is not subject, that's higher than the Hisalmos, that's higher than the earth as it was affected by the Tzimtzum. That's what we learned. Now, in the process, before we got to the Tachas Mitachas, he said that explaining, he wants to explain, he's going to explain with this. I'm going in backward order. I actually started with the last thing we learned, but let me go back for a moment. And that is, to explain this idea, he said, let's talk about the double Havaya Elokim that we find at times. And he gave the example by Eliyahu and Har Carmel. There, they said, Havaya Elokim, Havaya Elokim. What is this double Havaya Elokim? So he began to explain, he said that the Tzimtzum, which we're talking about transforming the Tzimtzum, remember we're going from Elokim, which conceals the divine. Breishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. And from there we want to, through Avodah, retrace the steps, not the way God created it in a concealment, but to reveal. So he said there's two facts, the Tzimtzum had two impacts. One of the Er HaBligvul, on just the infinite divine presence and consciousness, it concealed that. And second, on the Er HaGvul, that the Er HaGvul should be measured and be able to be tailored to fit into the containers and all the way down below, which requires Hislapshus and Hisalmus, a manner of enclothing and manifesting and concealment. So that's the second effect of the Tzimtzum. The effect on the Er HaPnimi, causing it to be concealed and to be, well, first of all, to create every piece of the existence, and also to ultimately it's subject to the concealment as necessary in order to create the yesh. Now, and how do we reverse that? That's the Avodah Sa'adam. What he called, let me just look at the, okay. So the first impact of the Tzimtzum is that Elokus was b'pshitus, the divine was the obvious, the given, and Mitzias, existence, was the novelty, and the Tzimtzum affected that it should be the other way around, that existence should be the given, and Elokus is the novelty. That's the first impact. And the second, as I said, is on the Pnimi. Now starts the Avodah. What's the Avodah? So the Avodah now is to reverse it and begin revealing the divine on the lowest levels and then climb darga acher darga. So he says everything we learned about that is working with the Pnimi, because the Makif is right now, the Abligvul is beyond, is concealed. What we're working on is revealing the divine which is within existence, the Hakav and its reflection as it comes all the way downward into the states of concealment, each level. So we reverse that by doing what? He says by the Rotzei Shanasa B'chinas Keli, the Rotzei of the creation, yearning and seeking and looking upward, essentially is the Avodah Malmata L'mayla, from the bottom up, to become a Keli. And that is through the Birurim of Biyah, the Birurim of Atzilus. As we explained, the Birur is a clarity and a separation between the divine that's concealed and what it is concealed, whether it's food or drink or any activity. I'm talking all the way in Elam Hazah now. Birurim are also in general in Bria, Yitzir, Asi, and Atzilus, as we spoke, the Birur of Eichel Metech Eichel, and Kedusha itself. But I'm not going to go into that right now. And that causes that the Ur should radiate, the Ur that's L'mayla Misalmus. Now you can interpret that two ways. You could say that you are now, that with the Ur which was subject and concealed is now being revealed. L'mayla Misalmus means above and not being concealed. Or you could say it's an Ur that's higher than the state, that the Ur that was concealed. It's not explicit. He just says L'mayla Misalmus, which is countering, of course, the Salmus as the Ur was subject to the Tzimtzum, which is also a big Chiddush, because even if God used the Tzimtzum and Elokim to conceal the divine so we don't see it, we don't feel it, so when we reveal it, what are we doing? We're basically countering the Tzimtzum effect, the Helam effect, the concealment effect by revealing it. So that already is L'mayla Misalmus. But you could say deeper than that, that we're actually activating and we're generating a light that was not subject to the Helam. I don't think that's the pshat, because then you're talking about the Ur that was not even subject to the Tzimtzum. I don't think he means that. But I can't say positively. But bottom line is, we will reach that level too. Because then he says, to the point, yeah, and then he says, to the point that you also reveal the Rotzei within the Ur, that you should radiate the Pnimiyas v'atzmus ha'Ur. And all the, so that's the effect, that's the Avodah of what? As he says, Kol ze b'chinas hayichud Havaya D'Liayleh, the ala oretz mitochas, which means the light as it relates to the worlds. So far we've not talked about Ur HaBligvul. We've not talked about that transcendent energy that's beyond any parameters. We talked about the revealing of the divine that is manifest within existence, and you're revealing it. It's somewhat, if you may remember, when he spoke about the difference between Ovis and Matan Torah, back in volume 1, he said the Ovis, they drew down the divine energy as it was in the beginning of creation before Chet Eitzadas. In other words, an Adam and Chava were in Gan Eden, Shechina b'tachtenim. As we read and learn in the beginning of Basi Lagani. Then the Chet Eitzadas caused that Shechina to be concealed. 7 generations, concealed, more concealed, more concealed. Avram reversed the process. So the Avos Avodah was not to bring Ur HaBligvul, it was just to clean up the pipes of the divine energy that were used to create existence that got clogged due to the Chatoim, due to the different generations of the iniquities, the disconnections and the dissonance that was created through these sins. So the Ovis basically reintroduced the the way it was meant to be. Essentially, as I put it, cleaning up the pipes, which would essentially be the Hapnimi that was there, but it was concealed. Matan Torah, we learned, is a Chodosh. Something new happened. What was the Chodosh? The whole new Chiddush. You're now introducing Habligvul. So this is more than the others did. Once you have the pipes cleaned, meaning the energy that's going into the structure, think of it like this. A human being is born a healthy body. It's a perfect, seamless flow and a keli for the soul. Then a person breathes and ingests and becomes and assimilates toxins into their system. The body then has become somewhat polluted, and the Oid HaNeshama can't flow through it smoothly, completely, seamlessly. But then you go through a cleansing process, health, exercise, the right diet, and so on. The body has now become more refined. So whether it's exactly as it was when the newborn, but let's say you get it back to that prime state. But that doesn't mean that you did it more. You didn't make it healthier than it was in the beginning. Then comes something new, where you actually can transform the body into becoming much more powerful and grow in a greater way. So Matan Torah introduced a new era, Chodosh, as we learned that Yichud Abba v'Iba Elokim. This is all the way back in volume 1. Those that remember, fine, doesn't matter. I'm just using it as an example. And that he explained was Er HaBligvul. Ultimately, when Mashiach comes, we're not just going to have the Gilead Lakus, the divine revelation as it was in the beginning of creation. Elam Milui and Divra. We're going to have Ela Teldos Peretz. Peretz is even more than Milui, meaning more than just filling the vacuum or filling that which was missing. We're actually going to draw a whole new level of energy into existence. Like he said before in the parentheses, that La'osid, you'll have that Elakuz B'Pshitis and Elam is B'Schatshus. Now, he's not saying that here right now, because we haven't gotten yet to that. But he just said the first step is ala oretz mitochas. That's basically revealing the divine within existence, and also the should be in a state of rotze. Now we're going to learn what is Shamayim Mimal. In this context, what is the idea of Yichud Havaya and Elokim as we're climbing upward in heavens above? Okay. And it's interesting to know that in the question, when he had asked the question, why do you need both phrases? He had said, they're both created by the same Elokim. But in the answer, as we see, he is making a distinction between heaven and earth. In the previous Maimer, the distinction was Ruchnius and Gashmis, the spiritual and material. Here, it's speaking about the levels of the divine, whether it's divine within existence or the divine beyond existence. So now we're going to learn the second part of this verse. Does anybody want to ask anything? Okay.
I have a quick question. We talk about an or pnimi. Is there a correlation between let's say the or makif or some higher level general or of Elokus, like the or before the Tzimtzum, or Habligvul, the highest level of light, the most expansive, and the or Hagvul. Is or Hapnimi the same as or Hagvul, or can you correlate those things?
That's exactly, you mentioned, yes, it is. It is. The answer is yes.
Okay. You mentioned yet. Just a follow-up question. I sound like a reporter. Yes, I did listen to the class yesterday on the audio, even though I wasn't here live. You mentioned, I think, maybe I didn't hear you right, but you said even before the Tzimtzum, I think you said there was this general or makif, and then there was an or pnimi. Is that so, that there was an or pnimi before the Tzimtzum?
The root of the or pnimi.
Well, the root of everything is before the Tzimtzum, but it seems like before the Tzimtzum, you just had this general or Ein Sof. So I was confused how you could say there's a root of or pnimi.
When did you join the class? This was discussed at length in back. I'll show you where. You can look it up if you like. It was discussed at length earlier. I was referring to that. that before the Tzimtzum itself, in a subtle way, the divine was beginning already to relate and envision existence. When I ever speak about Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, that expression, that God is envisioning existence, which is the 10 hidden spheres, that's before the Tzimtzum. That's the root of the Pnimi before the Tzimtzum. I said root. It doesn't have an active end role because everything there is all divine. One seamless divine, but there's a root for everything there. So this is discussed at length earlier. If you go back to page, if you want to look it up, I can tell you what page it's on. Not going to go into it right now, obviously, but basically page 1150, 1151 and on talks about that more at length.
Yeah, I wasn't here at that time, but I'll look into it. Thank you.
Okay, good. He actually even said, and I want to remind everybody, but he said at the bottom of page 1150, the Rebbe Rashab said that there's different interpretations of the Ayin Amiti and Ayin, the Ayin of the Yesh. Just a second here. 1 second. Yeah, so he said there that there's a difference between the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra, and said that there are different ways to interpret that. And he said, but he then said at the bottom of page 1149, he said, Omnam kana kavona. Here the main the intention is that the Ayin is all in the Er Pnimi. That in the Er Pnimi you have the Etzema Er, the Pnimi, the Pnimius Er, the Chetzenius Er, the different ways he explained it with the Kav, and higher than the Kav. Just a second. Okay, just refreshing myself there. That was that. So let's continue now from the line, new paragraph on the bottom of page 1190. So we covered ala oretz mitachas. He said that's transforming the tzimtzum as it impacts the immanent energy that enters internally into existence, and now revealing it through birurim. But now what it says, the first phrase says, B'shamayim emal, Havaya Elokim, B'shamayim emal v'ala oretz mitachas. What is B'shamayim emal referring to? He says that is going to refer to the first effect of the tzimtzum. Remember the Erein Sefer Bligvul. So he says, Hu liyas hagilid b'chinas ha'erein sof shenistalik. This is referring that it's revealing the Erein Sof, the infinite divine light that was removed or concealed. Remember, we just learned that the Tzimtzum impacts also that infinite expanse of divine consciousness that is boundless and unlimited, not the energy of the Kav and the Pnimi that enters into existence, that energy that was beyond all existence. She says so. Shammai Mamal is saying Havaya Elokim, that also in the Elokim, the Tzimtzum that conceals that too is countered, and we're revealing the Ir HaBligvul. This also is due to, as a result of transforming the Tzimtzum. Remember, the transforming of the Tzimtzum is not just impact number 2, but also impact number 1. No, it's not just revealing the divine that was concealed within existence, but also revealing the divine that was concealed, divine that is beyond existence. The transcendent energy, what he called Ir HaBligvul. K'moshe Yisboyer, as shall be explained. In other words, he's going to explain more about the transformation of that Tzimtzum. The difference, however, is the transformation of the Tzimtzum on level 2 is about revealing the divine that's concealed within existence. And the Gili, the transformation of the Tzimtzum on level 1, which is Shemayim and Mal, but he's talking that B'Igvul, is that the energy, the divine infinite that was removed, or so to speak, completely concealed, should be revealed. So one is revealing it within existence, and one is revealing that which is beyond existence, but that should be revealed and not concealed from existence. Okay. Now, I need to give another introduction before we continue, because as I've said a number of times, all this is very dense and brief, but the Rebbe Rashab is referring to ideas that were discussed at length. He keeps saying, Ba'irach, he said twice at length earlier, and that's the reason he's saying it, not just to tell us he explained it that way, because he wants us to know that it was discussed and you need to look there to really appreciate this. So I'll do that work a bit for the class here and say, the next piece is going to explain, so what is the difference then between Havaya Elokim of Ba'aretz Metachas and Havaya Elokim Shemayim Mimal? Since they're both Havaya Elokim, but meaning that in the Tzimtzum, Elokim is, remember, the name of Hashem that he uses to conceal the divine. Shem Shemogen Hashem Elokim. It's Hein Gvureisov. It's the power of God to conceal. The Tzimtzum is not, God forbid, an outside force. It's also a divine force. So just like there's a divine force to give, there's also the divine force that withholds or restrains or conceals. When you say Havaya Elokim, you're saying this Tzimtzum, that Elokim, Bereshis Bar Elokim, I'm revealing that Havaya Elokim, that too is part of the divine, and that revealing that which was concealed. So in the first step of that was you're revealing the Havaya within the Elokim that manifests in existence. Now we're talking about revealing the Havaya and Elokim of the Havaya that's higher than existence. So what's the difference between these two Havaya Elokim levels? So he's going to refer now back to the Maimer, Bamidbar Sinai, where he talks that there's two levels of Havaya. There's called Havaya D'Liayleh and Havaya D'Liayleh. So I know the plot thickens, but just to elaborate, let me explain. So in addition to the difference between Havaya and Elokim, or as we learned also Havaya and Adnai, Adnai was Elokim was how Malchus is in Atzilus, and Adnai is how Malchus comes into Biyah. There's also in Havaya itself levels. Remember, just like he said, Elokim is on all the levels, the Tzimtzum on every level, Havaya is the Gilui, the transcendent on every level. So there's a Havaya, the transcendent within Atzilus, there's Havaya and the transcendent higher than Atzilus, and there's Havaya that's the transcendent that he's going to speak about now, the Ir HaBligvul. So Havaya D'Liayleh and Havaya D'Liayleh refers to two levels of Yud Kei Vav Kei. So in addition, remember that Yud Kei Vav Kei is the main way that the divine, through the letters, manifests and creates everything. Havaya Meloshem Mahava, it's the creator. Sometimes the Kav is called Shem Havaya. It's not a contradiction, because Havaya, the letters that the Oyer, that's the creative energy of God, is made up of a Yud Kei Vav Kei. We also learned Ma, Ban, Sag, Ab. We learned about the four configurations of the Miluyim, of how you add up 45, 52, etc. That Shem Ma is the name of Bittel, the Odom, and the other names, each one have their role. All of these are permutations of Havaya. It's all about Yud Kei Vav Kei, just in different forms. So the Yud Kei Vav Kei, just like we say in general that the Chav Beis Asius, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, are 22 channels of energy, which God uses to create everything. It's just a matter of configuring the letters. So every word is made up of a mix of the tzirufim of the 22 letters. More generally, it's the Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's the real creative, the Yud, the Hey, Vav, Hey. And just to give a little more taste to understand, Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, the shape of the letters tell us. The Yud everything starts with a spark, with a kernel, with a seed, the Yud. The Hey is it spreads out and expands. The vav, it gets transmitted like a vav, like a line. And the final hey is it expands by the recipient. So in the spheres, you'd say chachma is yud, bina is hey, zah, the midas, is the vav, the 6 midas, and the last hey is malchus. In context of teacher-student, the teacher begins with the kernel of an idea, chachma, a point. He then develops it within himself and spells it out, fleshes it out. He then transmits it to the student, and the student is the hey that receives, and it's expanded in the kelim, in the containers of the student. So in general, all of Ishtalshalos, these are always 4 steps you will find. Whether it's Chachma, Bina, Zah, Malchus, or Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, is also, Atzilus is sometimes seen more as the Yud, because Chachma, Mekanana, Atzilus, Chachma is nested in Atzilus. So Atzilus primarily is like the Yud. Bria would be like the Hey. Bina, Mekanana, Bekrsaya. Bina is nested in the world of the throne, which is Bria. Zah, Mekanana, Yitzira. The Vav is nested in Yitzira, and the final Hey, Mekanana Basiya, is nested in Asiya. And remember, the 4 worlds as well have a microcosm and a macrocosm. Abiyah, the Klolus, Abiyah, the Pratis. So you can trace and find Yudke Vavke everywhere in that sense. So now he's bringing one more thing. In Havaya itself, there's 2 levels of Havaya. Havaya D'Liayleh and Havaya D'Liayleh. Now this was discussed in the Maimer, Bamidbar Sinai. I'll tell you what page if you want to look it up. But I just summed up briefly the idea, but we're gonna now explain it in the context of what we're discussing here. So Bamidbar Sinai is the Maimer before Shavuos. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, it starts at page 985. But the primary place where you really get to it is in page 987, where he talks about that Tzimtzum is in 2 inyanim. The 2 levels we're talking about here, concealing the Er HaBlikvul and affecting the Er HaGvul. Okay. And now there he brings, I'm just looking, where does he bring about? Oh, here we go. Beis Pamim Havaya Elokim. If you look on page 988. Actually, no. The bottom of 987, he starts talking about Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem. What's the 2 Havayas? We say, should have said Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Echad. We say, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. What's the second Havaya? So he explains there the 2 Havayas, which is very relevant to what we're discussing here, because this is now tying together all those knots. Okay. Right. And in between is the Elokim. So there he talks about these 2 levels of Havaya, page 987, 988. And then I'm going to be referring a lot back to these Maimorim because we're going to be talking about different themes that discussed already earlier. Then if you look at the bottom of page 994, he goes back again to Krishma, the 2 names of Havaya. What are the 2 names of Havaya? And then on top of 995. So all this is very relevant to what we're discussing because that's what the Rebbe Rashab is referring to in his discussion here. And that led into the V'yadaita Ayin. This was all prior to beginning the explanation based on the verse we're addressing now. But now the Rebbe Rashab is tying together those Maimorim with our theme here. So let's now go back to where we are. So he says this level of Havaya Elokim in the Er HaBlikvul that was concealed by the Tzimtzum, that we should not feel that divine is primary. Not the level of Tzimtzum that affects the Er Pnimi, which conceals it within existence. We're talking now, the concealment of the divine from existence should not sense Elokus B'Pshitus, that the divine is the natural state. So he says, this Gilui, this is the level of Ein Sof HaBlikvul, is the level of Havaya D'Liayleh, not Havaya D'Liayleh. And we'll understand this. We're going to learn inside, but I think with the background I gave, it will be a little easier to understand. Commotion is barely ill. as was explained earlier, where the Dibra Maskal Bamidbar Sinai that I just referred to, back on those pages that I mentioned. What do we learn there? The Beklol is Beis Shemus Havaya, that in general, the two names of Havaya that we're referring to here, Havaya D'Liayleh, Havaya D'Liayleh, Heim B'chinas Ha'er Sha'idei Tzimtzum, Va'er Ensof Shalifnei Tzimtzum. The two levels, one is the air that comes through the Tzimtzum, meaning the air Hagvul that comes after the Tzimtzum, and the second Havaya is Eir Ensof before the Tzimtzum. So when you say Eir Ensof before the Tzimtzum, you can refer to Havaya D'Liayleh. That's what's dominating there. When you say the air after the Tzimtzum, Havaya D'Liayleh. Okay, so, and we know that Tzimtzum had both impacts. It concealed Havaya D'Liayleh, which is the level of the Eir HaBligvul, and it concealed the Havaya D'Liayleh that enters into existence through Elokim, through the Kav, and so on. So he says, "V'zeu Havaya hu Elokim b'shamayim emal." And now we can understand. We spoke about Havaya Elokim aretz mitachas. That we explained is the revelation of the divine within existence. Now he says, Havaya Elokim b'shamayim emal, sheyeh gili b'chinas shem Havaya D'Liayleh. That there should be the revelation of the Eir Ensof before the Tzimtzum, which means the Eir Ensof HaBligvul. Okay. Now it's very brief. That's all he says right now. That's why it's so vital to learn what he said earlier. But but I basically summed it up, and I think it's pretty clear. It may throw you the words Havaya D'Liayleh, Havaya D'Liayleh, but that's because this is advanced material here, and the Rebbe Rashab is obviously swimming in these waters and already explained all this earlier. But if for all practical purpose, just think of it, of what I explained before with the Ovis Amat and Teda. There's one is, I'll put it in even in more applied, Chassidus applied terms. When a yesh below, when we, you and I, sit down to eat a meal, or we're involved in any other material activity, work, even taking a walk, whatever it may be. So unfortunately, if we don't do anything, we can very easily just indulge, or at least be neutral, as he says in Tanya, and not do anything l'shem shamayim. Read, you're hungry, you eat. I'm not talking about necessarily negative intentions. But the kavanah is that you should know. The yesh that you and I are, which means I exist, should be deliberate and contemplative and think about your life. Why are you here? Why was your neshama sent to this world? Just to eat and drink and take care of yourself? No. It's to recognize that your neshama was sent to this world to refine your life, to elevate it, to reveal godliness in yourself, in your animal soul, in your material activities, in your family, and your associates and friends, and by extension, your corner of the world. You know, the basic kavanah of Dira B'Tachtein. As soon as your mindset and your heart set directs itself that way, so then you make a bracha on the food. You acknowledge, you're recognizing the gift, Hazonas HaKoil, or other brachas we make on different gifts of life. The Medrash says, in the end of Tehillim, I'll call Neshima, Neshima, every breath you take, Tahalal Ka. You praise God. Because you recognize the gift of life. What are you doing? You're revealing the Elokus that was concealed through the Tzimtzum, the Havaya D'Liayleh, in Elokim, in the Tzimtzum that also God created. Remember, this concealment is also a divine creation. It's not our making. We come into a world that's already concealed. We can intensify it by not doing anything or just feeding the concealment, or we can fight it, or we can transform it, which is the whole purpose. You want to transform the concealment into revelation. But at this point, what have you revealed? You revealed the divine that is commensurate with and relates to you. Instead of saying, I own myself and Aniva Afsied, me and nothing else, you said, no, I thank God. It's Teiv Li, as we discussed. It's God on our terms. So it's godliness, which is a big achievement, because you've reversed the yesh from just being self-absorbed and now recognizing something more. And it's on a very basic level, just the idea that you realize there's a purpose to life. You realize that there's a mitzvah to do. It's essentially a conscientiousness that you've, instead of being egocentric, you've become God-centric in a way. But we know that godliness is not limited to us and existence. That's the next level of contemplation. Once you've come to a point where your yesh and your nefesh habamis, an animal soul, is ready to hear there's more to life than just you, now comes the next step. You come to realize that if God is beyond you, Havaya D'Liayleh, there's a godliness that's beyond existence. And that godliness is not eragvul. It's not a godliness that is manifesting and permeating existence. It's something beyond, transcendent. Now, each person comes to this in their own way. In other words, your Havaya D'Liayleh may be very different than mine. But relative to your awareness, that first you became aware, that's not just about the yesh, there's a divine within you. And that could be on a very basic level. I'm aware that I have a neshama. I wasn't aware, now I know. Or it can be on a much higher level. So the higher level is already now going into the domain where God is the primary reality. Not just that there's also a God within you, that there's a nitzutz birurim, that you're discovering the divine sparks within existence. Now you're coming to realize there's a divine that's beyond existence. Not just the divine energy of the artist within the art, but that the artist is beyond the art. And that, of course, creates a higher level of bittul, because then it's not about you, it's about God. It's much more the idea that God is the primary reality and we're the secondary reality. In the first step, not necessarily. You're still a yesh, but you recognize there's a divine within you. In other words, your goof is still very powerful, but you recognize there's a soul inside of it. Now we're talking about a soul or divine levels that are beyond. That's Havaya D'Liayleh in simple English. And that's Shamayim Mimal. So Oretz Mitachas, as we learned, is discovering it through Birurim and refining and recognizing and separating and elevating. We said separating and clarifying. Level 2, Shamayim Mimal, is a higher level, which is in heaven, meaning as it is, Havaya D'Liayleh. That's Mimal, Le'elah, a higher state. And that is the level of, in the root, it's the Ein Sof HaBligvul that's beyond existence. That's just a little explanation to make this a little more palatable. Okay. So that's V'zeu Havaya Elokim B'Shamayim Mimal Sheyeh Gilui B'chinas Shem Havaya D'Liayleh, the higher level of Havaya. Before we continue, I'll stop for any questions, because he's now going to explain, what's the mila? Is there a mila in this? Because you could argue the first step is far more important, because to turn from a yesh, a selfish, self-contained, self-absorbed yesh entity, to recognize the divine is a qualitative shift that's quite powerful. This level that we're talking can be, okay, once you reach there, now you're reaching higher levels. So he's going to explain now what's the mila of this higher level of bittul that comes from Havaya D'Liayleh Shamayim Mimal, the Havaya Elokim in heaven above. But before we continue, I'll stop if anybody wants to ask anything.
Rabbi Jacobson, didn't the Rabbi Rashab use the term for Havaya D'Liayleh as Alakuz Lifnei Tzimtzum? Lifnei Tzimtzum, he said, we just learned that. But what you're referring to here, when you just called it Havaya D'Liayleh, it seemed like when you went from a yesh concentric to godly concentric, that could be achieved, say, in Atzilus, I would think, even way after, there Havaya D'Liayleh, if we could reach that level at Atzilus, which is certainly still not the level of Or Lifnei Tzimtzum, Elokus Lifnei Tzimtzum, that you're still referring to that as Havaya D'Liayleh? I thought it was before Tzimtzum itself, Havaya D'Liayleh, as the Rabbi Rashab says.
Because at this point, when I speak Chassidus applied, I don't speak mathematics and calculations. I speak relative to us. Havaya D'Liayleh, relative to us, is the divine we recognize in our personal lives. And Havaya D'Liayleh, which is a taste of before the Tzimtzum. If you're talking about Havaya D'Liayleh in the full sense of the word, I don't think most of us are on that level. I would say all of us are not. The Rebbe Rashab is giving the whole picture. I was trying to apply this to our lives, where we, who are simple people, can find two levels of Havaya in our lives. That's how I was explaining it. If you're talking about the whole picture of it, generally speaking, yeah, Havaya D'Liayleh is overall before the Tzimtzum. But remember, as I said, for many of us, even reaching Asir Ruchnis is already like before the Tzimtzum. Because it's just words. You know, what means before the Tzimtzum? If you're talking about the true before the Tzimtzum, where God is the only reality, I mean, even a Rebbe will say that it's not always, a Rebbe is always on that level. Because they're talking about absolute Ened Mulvade 24/7. And that is why there's a Tzimtzum. So I was just trying to bring it into practical terms for us to work with. But yes, technically speaking, if you talk about it, Havaya D'Liayleh is generally the pre-Tzimtzum consciousness, and Havaya D'Liayleh is post-Tzimtzum consciousness. So it's correct.
Yes, but if I were to say, if somebody asked me what is Havaya D'Liayleh, just somebody that doesn't know much Chassidus, or just that in general, they've heard the term, the supernal higher level of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Could I, if I said it's Hashem as he's revealed in Atzilus, is that an incorrect statement according to Chassidus, or is it relative? It's proper there, but it's not talking about the ultimate Havaya D'Liayleh.
So first of all, where we didn't use the word Atzilus here at all. So I'm not sure why that word came in here, Atzilus. I would answer the following. Here'd be my answer, because I grew up in the system. I learned Chassidus the way it was taught to us, in a very technical way. And that's part of much what I do. My answer would be, if someone asked me that, would be exactly like this. If you're asking as a physicist and mathematician of Chassidus, technically Havaya D'Liayleh is the level pre-Tzimtzum. If you're asking me as Chassidus, that's supposed to be part of our lives internally, you have to find that Lifnei Tzimtzum within yourself. In other words, the Ened Mulvade within yourself. When you're in a state where you see that you feel the divine that's beyond existence. Is it technically before the Tzimtzum? Yes, that's the before the Tzimtzum. In other words, are we learning Chassidus as mathematical geography? Where do we place Havaya D'Liayleh so we can make the map complete? Or are we learning about it in a way that's personal? Where's Havaya D'Liayleh in me? That would be my answer.
Okay. Good.
It also addresses another issue which is very rarely mentioned. Where is this Lifnei Tzimtzum exactly? We talk about Lifnei Tzimtzum. So many people think, you know what, this is something that happened 5,781 years ago. Once the Tzimtzum took over, it's something before creation. But we know that Lifnei Tzimtzum is happening right now. So is the Tzimtzum, and so all these things that we're talking about. So when you speak in that language, where's the Lifnei Tzimtzum right now? So obviously it's a state of consciousness that's beyond what we can relate to, but it's still there somewhere, and it's not meant to remain some abstract entity. So the answer is we have to find, the whole idea of Chassidus is not physical locations. It's not like, okay, you know what, like here's the map, and we move along, and now, hey, I found Lifnei Tzimtzum suddenly, it's in this closet. You know, it's all about states of awareness and consciousness. That's really what Lifnei Tzimtzum means. A higher state of awareness where the divine is the only reality and existence is a novelty. So that statement itself, I can tell you, each one of us, if we were bringing now, would define that differently in our lives, because each of us is in a different place.
So
That's why I'm so adamant about not just
geographical
localizing it in some way. But I understand. Look, it's something we have to do all the time. Even Atzilus, are we in the shamas of Atzilus? You know, I mean, yes, all the shamas are rooted in Atzilus, but we go through layers and filters. But nevertheless, we learn what Atzilus is about, because you want to find Atzilus within you. And then ultimately, yeah, as you climb, hopefully you get to Atzilus within Atzilus. But we all know that's going to be a journey.
So the olam, that would be, it seems to me that the goal is to sort of reach a level of Elokus b'pshitas and olamus b'hischadshus, which I assume that's also in the level of Atzilus, that level.
Well, the Osid Love Atzilus will be on that level, not today.
It seems like, not to be
Atzilus
trite.
is not Elokus b'pshitas, olamus b'hischadshus. Generally, Elokus b'pshitas helem is reserved for lifnei Tzimtzum. Atzilus is all divine, but it's a divine of Eris and Kalim, of Chesed, of Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes. But it's not really for the discussion here. We're going off the reservation right now, meaning the local, the theme we're addressing here. And I don't want to go talk about all of Chassidus now. I want to keep focused on what we're addressing here. He's going to talk about now Havaya D'Liayleh in what that means in the bittul. Yeah, go ahead. Someone wanted to go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, in a sense, with respect to this practical Chassidus applied, and it is on point here. The difference between the Havaya D'Liayleh and Havaya D'Liayleh. It seems like we're talking about essentially crossing over the gvul. We're talking about the Ora Gvul and then the Ora Bli Gvul. And we're essentially talking about, not to be trite, but how do you cross over the Gvul? How do you go from an understanding or a Gilui of Ora Gvul to...
Didn't I just explain it? You have to find in your personal life the difference between the divine that you find in your parnasa, in your livelihood, in your family.
No, I agree. I wasn't asking...
One second, let me finish. Let me respond.
But I don't
in the
think
food
you understood
you
my
eat and
question.
so on. And then you have to find the divine that's beyond you.
I get it.
That's the bli gvul. We say every day, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol ma'idecha. What does ma'idecha mean? With all of you, all your might. Ma'idecha for you may be gvul for me, but for you it's bli gvul. If you give tzedakah, let's say $100 a month, and then you give 101, you've gone over from gvul to bli gvul, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, chapter 15.
Yeah, no, for sure. I understood everything you said. My question wasn't how. My question is in fact, this is what we're saying. This is how you cross over the gvul. This is how you go from Ora Gvul to Ora Bli Gvul. This paradigm that you just laid out is mamash the difference between Gvul and Bli Gvul. Yes? And how we
I'm not sure what you're trying to say. I'm not sure what you mean by Gvul and Bli Gvul. He said that Eretz Metachas is the divine within existence. He called that the Era Gvul. And he called the Shemayim Emal, Havaya D'Liayleh, is the that was before the Tzimtzum, that was the infinite that was concealed, and that he calling HaBli Gvul.
Right. But ultimately, this pasuk, Ve'edaita Hayom, is about a shiluv. It's about understanding how it's all one Elokus. And so it's when you say Or HaGvul and Or HaBli Gvul, it's helpful conceptually, but it's all one. It's not one or, because there are different levels of Elokus. I get that, but ultimately it's Elokus. So what I'm saying is that we're talking about how to conceive of how to understand that unity, if you will, of the light, of the divine light, from these different perspectives, but it's the same or. In other words, you can't think of, I think you just said it yourself, that or bli gvul, and what's or bli gvul for one person may be what's or gvul for one person may be or gvul for bli gvul for another person. But in other words, it's about how do you transcend the gvul, in a sense. How do you want to understand them both in this, don't you? You want to understand this as one or, ultimately, even though I
don't know about the one or. I'm not sure. Bottom line is, V'yadaita Yom is a mitzvah that says, you shall know today, you should become aware and grow in your awareness and internalize that awareness into your heart. That Havaya Elokim on two levels. What he called Yichud Tata, Yichud Elah, Das Tachten and Das Elyon. That on one hand, you want to unite the divine and recognize the divine within your existence. And a second level of awareness in V'yadaita Yom is Havaya Elokim b'shamayim emal, which is the divine beyond existence. That's what he's saying.
And we should never try to reconcile that ultimately a locus is a locus. I mean, there are stages.
That's not what he's discussing here. We'll continue learning, and we'll talk to a point about uniting the two. We're in the middle of a subject matter. We're literally in the middle of a sentence, actually.
Well, that's why I asked the question, because it raises the issue.
Okay, but right now I would wait till the Rebbe Rashab finishes the subject, then we can discuss it. Either he'll address it directly, which he will, by the way, and secondly, we have to finish the subject. Right now, the Rebbe Rashab is where he's right now. He's explaining these two levels. You're not going to be able to join the two if you first don't know what the two are.
Okay,
right?
Sure. Fair point. Thank you.
Okay.
I was just trying to get a concept, like a framework of reference. That's all. I wasn't mamish pushing you to answer the question. I was trying to make sure that my framework was fitting to what the Rebbe Rashab is giving over, and that I'm not coming up with
So
the
right
concept.
now he's talking about levels because we are human beings and we have to go, like we made the point in the previous classes that if you jump levels, mamata lamaila, it actually is destructive and also is delusional. He used those words.
I remember.
So I don't want to jump levels right now. Let's
Fair
stay
enough.
level by level.
Yeah.
Eretz mitachas shemayim emal. Well, now Havaya is going to explain now what is the advantage of Havaya D'Liayleh. That's where we are now.
Thank you.
Okay. The Yesh Yisrein. I'm 6 lines from the bottom of page 1190. The Yesh Yisrein begili erzeh shu b'chinas ha'er hablikvul. There's an advantage. There's a virtue. There's a Yisrein is like a quality that specifically comes when you reveal the energy, which is the level of the infinite light, the light beyond existence, basically, the transcendent energy. Why? The Hari Ha'er Pnimi, because the immanent energy, the Er Pnimi that enters and vivifies and energizes existence, that's an energy that was designated from the outset to be a air that is to radiate and illuminate the world's existence, bilvad. That's an energy specifically for a particular purpose, to illuminate and radiate and energize and create the worlds alone. She'ein zeh kamoya atzmus. That's not reflective of atzmus. That's reflective of atzmus's intention and kavanah, but it doesn't have the full glory of a divine infinity. And I need to explain this again. He's very bekitzer here because to me it's clear because he's summing it all up and he's relying on the hundreds and thousands of pages that we've learned already. Thousands of pages, or almost, we're talking about 1191. So yeah, 1,000 plus pages. So let me explain what this means, Kamaya Atzmus. And I'll begin with 2 questions. First of all, everything comes from Atzmus. So everything in some ways reflective of Atzmus. Secondly, Atzmus is as distant from Er HaBligvul as he is from Er HaGvul. We learned, this is not the primary thing of God, which means etzem, that he gives off and exudes oir. The sun was created lahoyer ala aretz. The sun was created to give off light. That's its purpose. That's its whole existence. It may have also elements that are not light, but that's its purpose. You can't you can't say that an atzmus who doesn't need anything and doesn't need to reflect, he doesn't need light, he doesn't need to reveal himself even. So atzmus is beyond it all. So what does it mean when we say something is kamoya atzmus and something is not kamoya atzmus? Now this is not my question. This is a question that the Rebbe Rashab discussed earlier in volume 2, in the beginning, where he talked about etzem and ispashtus. So let me tell you what he answers. Obviously, from Atzmus' perspective, everything is equally distant. Just like from infinity, there's no difference between number 1 and number trillion. Trillion is just as distant from infinite than number 1 is. But yet, the Eibishter wanted to have a relationship with us. And as such, he created a structure. And he wanted that structure to be something we can relate to and understand. So he said, I'm going to create a system. And this system is going to have a number of components. The kavanah of it all is because I want a partnership with you. I want a home in the lowest of worlds where the divine is completely concealed, or almost completely concealed. But for you to be able to grow, for you to be able to relate to me, you need to have levels that work for you, and they're levels that reflect more of me. So though I am infinitely distant from everything, but I am going to reveal myself in a state where you'll have me without any filters and layers and shields and partitions. Like when we say, when Mashiach comes, it says, a kanaf, a garment, will no longer conceal your teacher. Your eyes will see the teacher's face. Before that, before Lasad Lave, which is only after the world gets so refined that it can do that, Hashem says to Moshe, this past Parsha, no person can see me and live. Because if you see me, you will be me. Therefore, there's Tzimtzumim. But even before the Tzimtzum Arishan, Oyer itself is not Atzmus. But on the other hand, Oyer is nothing but Atzmus. Because all it does is reflect the source. Had God, Chassidus asked the question, why didn't God just create Eir HaGvul? Why do you need Eir HaBligvul? So the answer is because he wanted to give us a taste of himself in Metzias Nimtza. In our type of existence, you want a taste of me? Obviously, if God is going to reveal himself, it's going to be in infinite ways, not in limited ways. But that doesn't mean that Eir HaGvul is more distant from Atzmus. It just means it reveals less of Atzmus. So, Eir HaBligvul is like where you see it completely begilui in the full. So if God is going to manifest in a state of gilui, it's going to be Bligvul. He's going to have everything. Not just Chachma Bina Das is going to be higher than Spheris, it's going to be higher than any form and any structure. So basically when we've said the language that is used in Ayin Beis, he said there's two Giluyim from Atzmus. One is everything comes Mina Etzem, but some things are Kamoya Etzem. Mina Etzem means it's coming from there. Kamoya Etzem means it's reflective of the expansiveness and the infinite expansiveness of Shleimus of Elokus. Because if you ask the question, is God Shleimus? The answer is yes, he has everything. If you said, is he defined by having everything? No. But saying that God has everything, Shleimus of the Kula, is definitely more accurate than saying that God only has a few things. So the bottom line is, from our perspective, Bligvul is far more reflective of an infinite expansiveness, that everything is possible. Whereas the Eir HaGvul is specifically, no, I want this piece of art, 10 spheres, a structured existence, which is also the Kavanah. As a matter of fact, the Kavanah is the structure. But the Eibishter wanted to give us a taste, an experience of what does it mean, divinity on its own terms, without any limits. So the Eir HaBligvul is essentially a gift. It's giving us a taste of something that is beyond any structures, and we could have access to it, but it's going to take avodah and work. So the Eir HaBligvul, what he's going to say here is Kamoya Atzmus, because it reflects that aspect of the infinity of Atzmus. And the Gvul reflects the finite power of Atzmus. Both necessary, both are coming from Atzmus, but they have a different role that they play. The infinity of Atzmus is going to create real bittul. The finite of Atzmus, as we learned in volume 1, cannot create bittul because it recognizes existence. It would be like the difference between when you have a teacher and you're learning from this teacher. He's a brilliant teacher. The Rebbe is teaching you. And he's such a good teacher, he's able to explain every idea clearly. You come away saying, wow, I really understand clearly this idea. Then you come to a recognition, 1 second. Is this all of the Rebbe and the teacher's mind? You realize, 1 second, no, he's only giving me a little piece of himself. If I was able to go into his mind, it's infinite. Relatively speaking, I'm talking as an example. And what does that do? That causes awe. The first level, you also have a measure of bittul and respect, but it's a respect because you appreciated him. The second one tells you, wow, whatever I appreciate, he's far, far more than that. So that creates a bittul b'mitzias, because then you realize even what you have is not really significant compared to the big picture. In the first level of bittul, it's a bittul because what you have is all coming from him, and you appreciate it actually. The second one is so beyond you, it says, wow, that if whatever I have is so powerful, imagine what I don't have, how much he has, and that creates a bittul b'mitzias where you come to recognize that even my existence is a complete novelty and it's Elokus b'pshittus. In the first level, you don't feel Elokus b'pshittus. The first level, you understand Elokus, the idea, but you appreciate it because you're understanding it and you're relating to it. And yes, you recognize it's coming from a mashpia. It's not like you feel you're on that level, but it's something you can say, I appreciate it because I know what it is. And the second level is one that completely, in a way, nullifies, in a good way, total bittul, the mitzvah, is because you're recognizing a complete infinity. Had God not given us Eira Bligvul, you'd only have the first one, not the second one. That's the general meaning when he says Kamoya Atzmus. And this is based on, I can refer you to the pages where this is discussed. It's in the Shvuah saying Gimel Maimarim in volume 1, and it's the beginning of the Rosh Hashanah Maimarim here, the beginning of, more than Rosh Hashanah, the first 30 pages in the beginning of volume 2 is where this is discussed more in detail. But that's the brief of it. So we're going to stop here, but if anybody wants to ask something, please.
That means that there is no real connection to the Atmos itself. It's only for us. This is the way.
That's not correct, because Atmos has the power to put himself into this. Remember, this is not created by some outside force. Chaz v'shalom. Atmos, when we say Eisi atem leichim, he says, I am investing. If you remember, we learned as well earlier here that the Yesh HaNivra gives us a taste of Yesh HaMiti. Atzmus mitzusim atzmuse. That does not have that. So when you take everything together, Atzmus has put himself into Eira Bligvul, is the Giluyim of Bligvul, in Eira Gvul, and ultimately in the Yesh HaNivra, he put in the Koyach HaAtzmus of mitzusim atzmuse and built the Mitzias Nimtza and Mechuyev HaMitzias, as we learned. And yes, we can come to appreciate. We will never be God, but we can have a relationship even with the highest levels. And at the same time, that doesn't mean we have to understand everything, because there are levels in Atzmos that are beyond comprehension. That doesn't mean you can't have a relationship with it. Bittul creates a relationship too. Remember that. That's the second point.
So through the Yesh HaNivra, you could reach Atzmos Mamesh. But in
see, this Atzmos Mamesh that you're saying is, you're talking here technically, mathematically, or you're talking in Inyan?
In the Inyan. Because we see Atem like him, but in
you will never, listen, 1 second. Let's make one thing clear. There's only one God. We will never be God. Do you understand that?
I understand that.
Does that mean we don't have a relationship with God? The Eibishter says, nevertheless, though you will never be me, you can have a complete relationship with the deepest levels of me. And I'll teach you how. As through Aveda. Remember, this doesn't happen automatically. For us to be there, we have to work on refining ourselves to appreciate. I was talking here about the Bligvul of Elokus. If you're talking about appreciating the Atzmus of Atzmus, that's more through understanding that he can create Hulavade Bekechi V'Yecholte. Like I said, you come to learn how awesome he is beyond you. So that is also, the Bligvul teaches us that, and the Yesh teaches us in a different way.
Right.
Anyway, the point is
we need the
that all these are methods to connect.
We need the Bligvul in order to appreciate what the Gvul is, right?
That's one, not the only thing. I spoke more than that. I said a lot more than that, but that's one part of it. We'll talk about it more as we learn. He's going to discuss now the mile of the Bligvul. That's really what he's focusing on now.
By the way, what you spoke about yesterday, why is it saying Ve'al ho'oretz mitochas? Even according to the Dikduk, it fits perfect. Because it said B'shomayim mimal, you cannot say U'bo'oretz mimal. You have to say Ve'al ho'oretz mitochas.
Why can't you say U'bo'oretz mitochas?
Because we want to say Oretz is symbolizing the lowest of the lowest.
So why can't you say U'bo'oretz mitochas? Why do you say Ve'ala oretz? He doesn't say Ala shemayim mimal. He says B'shemayim mimal Ve'ala oretz mitochas. Anyway, I explained because maybe Oretz has to remain on a lower level than Elokus itself, because that's what makes it Oretz, Tachten. Whereas Shemayim is more of a Keli. But maybe, I'm not sure if that's Pshat. Okay,
Aretz is the lowest level.
so I can
So
say
you can't be in the
Aretz.
Aretz. You can be on the lowest level. You can't be in Shemayim is unlimited, so you have to be in Shemayim.
That's what I just said, but I don't know. Is that accurate? Why can't you say, and godliness is not within the Aretz, he's only above the Aretz?
I'd say Aretz is the bottom level. I don't know, whatever.
So
You know-
they're betachtenim. They're betachtenim. The Eibush is mislabish, betprimis, and tachtenim.
Had an interesting discussion about that yesterday, and somebody suggested, as again, derech eshar, but maybe ala ar hatachas, there's actually 3 levels there. One is sovev, as a level of sovev as it relates to human beings. One is or panimi, al would be ala aretz would be sovev, aretz would be panimi, and tachas would be the level of quantum mechanics, where there's a whole different level below the Eretz, which they call small, the science physics of small particles, subatomic particles, which is something the eyes can't see. It's something below natural human behavior, and there's a level of possibility, probability, rather determination that could possibly relate to the deepest levels of atzmas, where there's no unlimited possibilities, so to speak, rather than determination, which could be on the Aretz level. What do you think of that, Rabbi?
I think it's cute, but I don't know how authoritative it is. I mean, some people can say whatever they want to say. I don't see it here in the Maimer at all. So I want to distinguish, since we're learning the Rebbe Rashab's Maimer, and he's the one that's speaking now, the Rebbe Rashab, I would be careful. Can it be understood that way? Yeah, I could see someone saying a pshat like that. I don't know how accurate it is, so I'm not sure. I don't have anything to say really. Regarding the hemshech here, so far he's not explained.
Very nice scientific, but I don't know if this is a pshat. I don't know. It's very beautiful what you said.
It's not, the pshat is for sure not. The question is if it's acceptable to interpret it that way. Everything's possible. Shivim panim l'teira. You can always explain something. I don't have a problem with it per se. That's why I would react. Regarding the discussion, okay, you know what? Let me stop